A simple woman was thrown out of a billionaire's wedding until they found out she is the bride. She wore sneakers. They wore designer heels. She came to check on the floral arrangement, just a quick peek before slipping into her gown. But in less than 5 minutes, she was surrounded, insulted, and thrown out like an unwanted guest. Would you stay quiet if people looked down on you just because you didn't look like one of them? Let me know in the comments. And if you believe in showing kindness to people, do not forget to subscribe for more unforgettable stories. Welcome back to the channel, my beautiful story family. I would be glad to know that these lessons get to people in different parts of the world, so please let me know where you're watching from. Thank you so much for joining our growing community. We appreciate all of you. Now, let us begin. The morning sun glinted off the polished chrome of a Rolls-Royce Phantom as it purred up the cobblestone drive of the Château de Lumière, a sprawling estate nestled in the hills of Napa Valley. Maybachs and Bentleys followed, their tires crunching softly, disgorging a parade of tailored suits and shimmering gowns. The air buzzed with the hum of wealth. Media drones hovering for the perfect shot, CEOs murmuring over champagne flutes, fashion tycoons adjusting their cuffs, and billion-dollar board members exchanging knowing glances. The wedding of the decade was about to unfold, a union of power and prestige, and every detail screamed opulence. Crystal chandeliers gleaming in the grand hall, orchids cascading from marble columns, a string quartet weaving Vivaldi into the breeze. Cameras flashed, capturing the elite in their natural habitat. A world where money was the only currency that mattered. Brielle Monroe slipped through a side gate, her sneakers silent on the gravel path. Her caramel skin glowed under the morning light, her dark curls pulled into a loose bun, a plain white t-shirt tucked into faded jeans. At 28, she carried a quiet beauty, unpolished but striking, her hazel eyes sharp with purpose. She wasn't here to gawk or mingle. She'd come to check the floral arrangements, a final glance before slipping into her gown. The roses, her one insistence, had to be perfect, their soft pink a nod to her late mother's garden. She'd told the planner a dozen times, no substitutions, no shortcuts. But trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, not today. The service entrance led to the grand hall's back corridor, a maze of bustling staff and clattering trays. Brielle moved quickly, her heart a steady drum, the weight of the day pressing against her chest. She wasn't nervous, not exactly, more like a wire stretched taut, ready to snap or hold. She'd spent months planning, every detail a thread in a web she'd woven herself. This wasn't just a wedding. It was her moment, her proof, a day she'd earned through years of grit and quiet defiance. She reached the hall, the doors ajar, and paused, peering inside. The roses were there, spilling over gold vases, their petals catching the chandelier's light. Perfect. A breath she hadn't known she was holding slipped free, and she smiled, small but real, a flicker of relief. She turned to go, her sneakers squeaking faintly on the polished floor, when a voice sliced through the hum. "Excuse me." It was sharp, clipped, dripping with authority. A woman stood in the corridor, mid-40s, her blonde bob severe, her black suit pristine. The planner, Celeste Vaughn, her name badge glinting like a badge of rank. Her eyes raked over Brielle, sneakers, jeans, t-shirt, and narrowed, a verdict already formed. "This is a private event. Guests like you don't belong here." Brielle froze, her smile fading, the wire in her chest tightening. "I'm not a guest," she said, her voice calm but firm, meeting Celeste's gaze. "I'm just checking the flowers." Celeste's lips pursed, a thin line of disbelief. "Checking the flowers?" She stepped closer, her heels clicking, her tone icing over. "The staff has that handled. You need to leave, now." Brielle's jaw tightened, but she kept her hands loose, her posture steady. She'd faced this before. Assumptions, dismissals, the quick judgment of those who saw her clothes, her skin, and decided her place. "I'm not staff either," she said, her voice low, a thread of steel running through it. "I have every right to be here." Celeste laughed, short and cutting, her eyes flicking to a passing waiter as if to confirm her authority. "Every right." She crossed her arms, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "Sweetheart, this is the Warwick wedding. Billionaires, moguls, people who matter. You're in sneakers. Do the math." The words landed like a slap, but Brielle didn't flinch. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, held Celeste's, a silent challenge. She could explain, could say the truth, but something stopped her. A spark of defiance, a need to see how far this would go. "I'm not leaving," she said, her voice quieter now, but heavier, each word deliberate. "Not until I'm ready." Celeste's face hardened, her patience snapping. "Security," she called, her voice rising, drawing eyes from the hall. Two guards appeared, burly men in black suits, their radios crackling. "Escort this person out," she said, waving a hand at Brielle like she was a stray dog. "She's disrupting the event." The guards hesitated, one glancing at Brielle, his brow furrowing. "Ma'am," he said, his tone softer, almost apologetic, "you need to come with us." Brielle's heart pounded, not from fear but from the absurdity, the injustice of it. She could end this, say her name, her role, and watch Celeste's face collapse. But the crowd was gathering now, guests peering from the hall, their murmurs a low buzz. A woman in a silver gown, her neck dripping with pearls, leaned toward her companion, her whisper carrying, "Honestly, why do they let staff wander in here?" The comment stung, sharper than Celeste's dismissal, and Brielle's hands clenched, her nails biting her palms. She saw it then, their eyes, their smirks, the ease with which they placed her outside their world. She wasn't invisible to them, she was less, a shadow to be swept away. Her silence wasn't surrender, though. It was a choice, a gathering of strength, her eyes burning with a secret they couldn't touch. "I'll go," she said finally, her voice steady, cutting through the murmurs. She looked at Celeste, then the guards, her gaze unwavering. "But you'll regret this," Celeste scoffed, turning away, already dismissing her. "Dramatic," she muttered, signaling the guards to move. They flanked Brielle, not touching her but close, guiding her toward the service exit. The crowd parted, their whispers trailing her. Who is she? Probably a caterer so embarrassing, each one a needle, but she kept her head high, her steps measured. Her sneakers were silent now, no squeak, as if even the floor respected her exit. Outside, the gravel crunched under her feet, the estate's grandeur looming behind her. The guards stopped at the gate, one muttering, "Sorry, ma'am," before turning back. The iron gates clanged shut, locking her out, the hum of the wedding fading to a distant murmur. Brielle stood there, the breeze cool against her skin, her t-shirt clinging lightly from the heat of the moment. Her eyes, hazel and fierce, stared at the gates, not with defeat, but with a fire that hadn't dimmed. She reached into her pocket, pulling out a small folded note, her checklist for the day scribbled in her own hand. At the top, in bold, roses. Check. Below it, a reminder. Gown fitting, 11 a.m. She glanced at her watch, 10:45. A slow smile curved her lips, not bitter but resolute, a spark of something dangerous, something alive. They'd thrown her out, mocked her, judged her, but they didn't know who she was. Not yet. She turned, walking down the drive, her sneakers kicking up dust, the estate shrinking behind her. The socialite's whisper echoed, "Why do they let staff wander?" But it wasn't the insult that stayed with her. It was the secret in her eyes, the truth she'd held back, the moment she'd chosen to let them underestimate her. She wasn't just Brielle Monroe, the woman in sneakers. She was the bride, the heart of this wedding, and when they learned that, the chateau would tremble. Her phone buzzed, a text from her best friend, Lena. "Where you at? Gown's ready, girl. You good?" Brielle's fingers hovered, then typed, "Long story. Be there soon." She slipped the phone back, her steps quickening, the wire in her chest still taut but thrumming now, not with anger but anticipation. The fitting was at a boutique nearby, her gown waiting, a vision of silk and lace she'd designed herself, every stitch a testament to her journey. She'd slip into it, transform, and return. Not to prove them wrong, but to show them who she'd always been. The road stretched ahead, lined with vineyards, the sun climbing higher. She could hear the wedding's distant pulse, music, laughter, the clink of wealth. But it felt like another world, one she'd step back into on her terms. Celeste's sneer, the guard's hesitation, the socialite's whisper, they'd all see soon enough. Brielle's smile grew, sharp and quiet, her eyes holding a promise. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Brielle walked down the vineyard-lined road, the Chateau de Lumiere's iron gates fading behind her, their clang still ringing in her ears. The sun climbed higher, warming her caramel skin, but her hazel eyes burned with a fire undimmed by Celeste's sneer or the socialite's cutting whisper. Her sneakers kicked up dust, each step a pulse of resolve, her folded checklist. Roses. Check. Gown fitting. 11 a.m. A tether to the truth she'd held back. They'd thrown her out, mocked her, judged her as staff, an outsider in their glittering world. But she was Brielle Monroe, the bride, the heart of this wedding, and the weight of that secret fueled her, not with anger, but with a quiet, dangerous anticipation. Her phone buzzed again. Lena's text, "Girl, you better spill when you get here. Boutique's waiting." Brielle smiled, sharp and private, and quickened her pace. The gown was her armor, the moment she'd return her reckoning. She wasn't running. She was preparing. The road curved toward the boutique, Napa's hills rolling green under the morning light, but her mind slipped elsewhere, pulled by a memory as vivid as the dust under her feet. 2 years ago, Atlanta, a rainy night that changed everything. The cafe where it began called to her, and she let it come, the past weaving into the present, a reminder of why she stood here now, unbroken. The rain came down in sheets, drumming against the windows of Bean and Blossom, a small cafe tucked on an Atlanta side street. Brielle, 26 then, leaned on the counter, her apron stained with espresso, her curls pinned back, humming to a Nina Simone track playing low. The clock read 8:55 p.m., 5 minutes to close, and the place was empty, the last customer long gone. She was wiping down the espresso machine, her mind on her sketchbook at home, designs for dresses she'd never afford to make, when the bell above the door jangled, sharp and unexpected. She looked up, ready to call out that they were closed, but the words caught. A man stood there, drenched, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, his tailored suit clinging to broad shoulders. He was tall, mid-30s, with a jawline sharp enough to cut glass, but his eyes, deep brown, almost black, held a mix of frustration and something softer, like he'd just laughed at his own bad luck. He shook water from his sleeve, glancing around the empty cafe, then at her, a half-smile breaking through. "Thought this place was closed," he said, his voice low, smooth, with a trace of New York in it. "Sign says 9. "It does," Brielle said, crossing her arms, her tone dry but warm. "Which means you've got 4 minutes to order and get out, or I'm charging you for my overtime." He laughed, a sound that filled the small space, and stepped closer, leaving a trail of rainwater. "Fair. Black coffee. Fastest you've ever made it. I'm not here to ruin your night." She raised a brow, moving to the machine, her hands quick but deliberate. You already did, walking in like a drowned cat. What's a guy like you doing out in this mess anyway? He leaned on the counter, watching her work, his smile widening. A guy like me? What's that mean? She glanced at him, taking in the suit, Armani, if she had to guess, worth more than her rent, and the watch glinting on his wrist. Overconfident businessman, she said, pouring the coffee, her voice teasing but sharp. Probably lost a deal and thought a cafe would fix it. He chuckled, unoffended, his eyes catching hers, holding them. Close. Missed a flight, cab broke down, and my phone's dead. So what's a girl like you doing in a place like this? She slid the coffee across, her laugh light but real, Nina Simone's voice curling around them. Serving coffee to overconfident businessmen who think they're charming. Think. He raised the cup, his grin playful, but his gaze was steady, searching. I'm Dorian Sterling, by the way, and I'm betting you're more than a barista. She hesitated, her usual walls up, but something in his voice, genuine, not slick, cracked them. Brielle Monroe, she said, leaning on the counter, mirroring him. And maybe I am, but you don't get that story for one coffee. He sipped, his eyes never leaving hers, the rain a soft roar outside. Then I'll come back tomorrow, and the day after, till I earn it. She rolled her eyes, but her smile betrayed her, a spark flaring in her chest. The bell jangled again, another late straggler, but Dorian didn't move, his focus on her, like the world could wait. They talked, the minutes stretching past closing, the rain slowing to a drizzle. He asked about the music, Nina, her mother's favorite, and she admitted she loved jazz, the way it felt like a heartbeat. He countered with Miles Davis, then threw in a curveball. He'd minored in philosophy, loved arguing about meaning over money. Money's easier, she said, wiping a spill, her tone half serious. Pays the bills. Sure, he said, leaning closer, his voice dropping. But meaning keeps you up at night. What's yours? She paused, her hands stilling, his question cutting deeper than he knew. Making something real, she said finally, her voice quieter, raw. Something that lasts. You? He looked at her, not the counter, not the rain, just her. Finding someone who sees the world like I do, he said, and the air shifted, heavy with something unspoken. The straggler left, the cafe empty again, and Brielle locked up, Dorian waiting under the awning, his coffee gone. Walk you home? He asked, no pressure, just a question. She studied him, the rain beading on his jacket, his eyes steady, not pushing. I'm 3 blocks away, she said, stepping out, letting him fall in beside her. They walked, the city slick and shining, talking, her dreams of designing, his late-night runs to clear his head, their shared love for quiet moments over loud ones. At her door, a narrow walk-up, she turned, the rain a soft curtain between them. Tomorrow, then, he said, his smile half question, half promise. Only if you're not late, she shot back, her grin matching his, and slipped inside, her heart racing, not from the rain but from him. That night, alone in her tiny apartment, her sketchbook open, she drew, a dress flowing, inspired by the way the rain had caught the streetlights. Dorian Sterling, CEO of Sterling Global, she'd Googled him later, stunned but not surprised, had walked into her life, and something told her he wouldn't walk out easily. Their banter, their connection had been small but real, a seed planted in the rain, growing into love over months of coffee, walks, debates about jazz and dreams. He saw her, not as a barista, but as Brielle, and she saw him, not the billionaire, but Dorian, the man who'd fight for her heart. Back in Napa, the boutique came into view, a small shop tucked between vineyards, its windows glowing. Brielle's steps slowed, the memory of that rainy night fading but leaving its warmth. Dorian was why she was here, why she'd fought for the roses, why she'd endured Celeste's venom and the socialite's scorn. Their love, forged in Atlanta's streets, had led to this wedding, to her role as the bride they'd cast out. She pushed open the boutique door, Lena waiting inside, her gown a vision of silk and lace across the room. "Girl, you look like you've been through it," Lena said, pulling her into a hug. "Long story," Brielle said, her smile sharp, her eyes still burning. "But I'm ready now." She stepped toward the gown, her fingers brushing the fabric, the memory of Dorian's voice, someone who sees the world like I do, steadying her. They'd humiliated her, thrown her out, but they didn't know her story. Their story. She'd walk back into that chateau, not as the woman in sneakers, but as Brielle Monroe, the bride, and the world would shift when they saw. Brielle stood in the boutique, her fingers lingering on the silk of her gown, its lace delicate under the soft light. Lena's hug still warmed her, but the sting of the chateau lingered, Celeste's icy dismissal, the socialite's whispered scorn, the heavy clang of the gates shutting her out. Her sneakers, dusty from the vineyard road, felt out of place against the boutique's polished floor. Yet they grounded her, a reminder of who she was beyond the bride they'd rejected. The memory of Dorian's voice from that rainy Atlanta night, someone who sees the world like I do, steadied her pulse, weaving through the hurt like a thread of steel. She wasn't just the woman they'd humiliated, she was Brielle Monroe, Dorian Sterling's love, and, soon, his wife. The thought sparked a fire in her hazel eyes, not anger but resolve, a promise to return and rewrite their story on her terms. Lena, leaning against a rack of veils, raised a brow. "You gonna tell me what happened, or do I have to guess why you look like you're plotting revenge?" Brielle's lips curved, a half-smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Not revenge," she said, her voice low, steady. "Just truth. They'll see soon enough." Lena nodded, knowing better than to push, and gestured to the gown. "Then let's get you into this. Time to remind them who you are." Brielle exhaled, stepping toward the fitting room, the weight of the morning still heavy but shifting, like a storm breaking into light. As she slipped out of her t-shirt, her mind drifted again, pulled back to Atlanta, to the months after that first rain-soaked meeting. Dorian had kept his word, coming back to the cafe, and their connection, small at first, a spark in the dark, had grown into something she hadn't dared dream of. The memory called, vivid and warm, and she let it unfold, a reminder of why she'd fight for this day, for him, for them. The Bean and Blossom was never empty, but on quiet nights when the rain kept customers away, Brielle felt it most, her world small, her dreams big, trapped behind the counter. A week after Dorian's first visit, the bell jangled again, just before closing, and there he was. Not drenched this time, but still striking. His dark suit crisp, his brown eyes catching hers with that same half-smile. "Told you I'd be back," he said, sliding onto a stool, his voice warm, like he'd been counting the hours. She crossed her arms, her apron smudged with coffee grounds, her tone teasing but guarded. "And I told you not to be late. Black coffee again, or you feeling adventurous?" He leaned forward, elbows on the counter, his gaze steady, playful. "Surprise me, something you drink." She raised a brow, intrigued, and turned to the machine, crafting a latte with a hint of cinnamon, her mother's old trick. "Don't complain if it's too sweet," she said, sliding it over, watching him closely. He sipped, his eyes lighting up, genuine, not performative. "This," he said, setting the cup down, "is better than anything I've had in Paris. You're good at this, Brielle." She shrugged, wiping her hands, but his words landed, soft but heavy, stirring something she didn't want to name. It's just coffee, she said, leaning on the counter, mirroring him. You always this easy to impress? Only when it's real, he said, his voice dropping, his eyes holding hers, and the air shifted, charged with something new, something dangerous. Dorian came back the next night, and the next, always late, always alone, slipping in just before she locked up. The cafe became their space, Nina Simone on the speakers, the counter their stage, their talks stretching past closing. He'd order coffee, she'd challenge him. Miles or Coltrane? Why philosophy if you're chasing money? And he'd fire back, his wit sharp but never cutting, his questions pulling at her edges. What's the one thing you'd make if money didn't matter? He asked one night, rain tapping the windows, the cafe dark except for their corner. She paused, her cloth stilling on the counter, his question slicing through her usual deflections. A dress, she said finally, her voice quiet, raw. Not for anyone else, just mine. Something that feels like me. He nodded, not pushing, his eyes soft but intense. I'd wear it, he said, deadpan, and her laugh broke the tension, loud and free, pulling him in until they were both laughing, the sound louder than the rain. He never came during the day, never brought colleagues or friends, and she noticed, though she didn't ask. His life, Sterling Global, boardrooms, private jets, was a world apart, splashed across headlines she'd skimmed. But here, he was just Dorian, the guy who liked her cinnamon lattes, who debated jazz like it was a religion. She Googled him once, late at night, her heart sinking at the scale of his world, billionaires, mergers, power. But when he showed up the next evening, his tie loosened, his smile for her alone. She let it go. He wasn't hiding her, she told herself. He was protecting something. One night, a month in, they walked again, her umbrella barely shielding them from a summer storm. The city glowed wet and gold, their steps slow, neither ready to part. At her door she turned, the rain loud, his jacket soaked. Why do you keep coming back? She asked, her voice steady but searching, her hazel eyes locked on his. I'm just a barista, Dorian. Your world's different. He stepped closer, the umbrella tilting, rain streaking his face. You're not just anything, he said, his voice low, fierce. You matter to me, Brielle, more than any of it. Boardrooms, deals, all that noise. You're real. This is real. Her breath caught, his words hitting like a wave, washing away doubt. I don't need your money, she said, her voice firm, raw. I don't need your world. I just need to know I matter to you. You do, he said, his hand brushing her cheek, rain cold against her skin. More than you know. He leaned in, his lips meeting hers, soft but sure, a kiss that tasted of coffee and rain, sealing something neither could name yet. They didn't rush after that, but the shift was undeniable. Dorian's visits grew longer, their talks deeper, her childhood in Savannah, his in Brooklyn before wealth changed everything, their shared hunger for something lasting. He kept her separate from his world, not out of shame, she realized, but care, shielding her from the vultures who dissect her, judge her, reduce her to a headline. They'd eat you alive, he said once late, his voice heavy, his arm around her on her couch. I won't let them touch us. She nodded, trusting him, but a small part of her wondered, would he ever bring her in, claim her fully? She pushed it down, focusing on their quiet nights, their laughter, the way he'd sketch her designs beside her, his hand steady, his belief in her fierce. He wasn't perfect, work pulled him away, calls cutting their time short, but he was hers, and she was his, a secret love growing stronger, waiting for its moment to step into the light. The boutique's fitting room was warm, the gown slipping over Brielle's skin like a second chance. Lena zipped it up, her gasp breaking the quiet. You're a vision, girl, she said, stepping back, her eyes shining. Brielle turned to the mirror, the silk hugging her curves, the lace trailing like a whisper of her dreams. She was no longer the woman in sneakers, but the bride, the one they'd cast out, ready to reclaim her place. Her phone buzzed. Dorian. Everything set? Miss you. She smiled, typing back, almost. Be there soon. The memory of their Atlanta nights, their secret love, pulsed in her, a reminder of why she'd endured the chateau's cruelty. Dorian had protected her then, kept her from his world's glare, but today she'd step into it, not as his secret, but his equal, his wife. Celeste, the socialite, the guests, they'd see her not as staff, but as Brielle Monroe, the woman Dorian chose. She stepped out, Lena clapping, the boutique glowing. Ready to shake their world? Lena asked, grinning. More than ready, Brielle said, her voice steady, her eyes fierce. The chateau waited, its gates no longer a barrier but a challenge. She'd walk through them, her gown a banner, her love for Dorian a fire no one could dim. They'd humiliated her, but they didn't know her heart, her story, the man who'd fought for her from that rainy night to now. The wedding was hers, and she'd claim it, leaving their judgment in the dust. Brielle stepped out of the boutique, the silk of her gown whispering against her skin, its lace catching the Napa sunlight. Lena's clap echoed in her ears, a spark of triumph, but the fire in her hazel eyes burned for more than the dress. The chateau's rejection, Celeste's venom, the socialite's sneer, the cold clang of the gates, still stung, but it fueled her now, a steady pulse of defiance. She was no longer the woman in sneakers they'd cast out. She was Brielle Monroe, Dorian Sterling's bride, and the weight of that truth, forged in Atlanta's rainy nights, steadied her like armor. Her phone buzzed. Dorian's text. Be there soon. Miss you. Her reply was quick, almost, ready to shake things up. She slipped it back into her bag, her smile sharp, private, a promise to herself and him. The chateau waited, its opulence no match for the love she carried, a secret they'd kept from the world but would reveal today. Lena slung an arm around her, guiding her to the waiting car, a sleek black sedan hired for the day. You're about to make jaws drop, Lena said, her grin wide, infectious. Wish I could see that planner's face when you walk in. Brielle's laugh was soft but real, her nerves settling. She'll see, she said, her voice low, resolute. They all will. As the car pulled away, Napa's vineyards blurring past, her mind tugged her back to Atlanta, to a night that had redefined her future. The gown, the wedding, this moment. They all traced back to Dorian, to the quiet, unshakable love they'd built in the shadows. The memory called, vivid and warm, pulling her into the moment that had set this day in motion. The bean and blossom was her sanctuary, but by late summer it was Dorian's too. He came nearly every night, slipping in just before closing, his suit a little less crisp each time, his smile a little more hers. Brielle would tease him, late again, Sterling, and he'd fire back, leaning on the counter, his brown eyes catching hers like they'd never let go. Their talks grew longer, deeper, the cafe a bubble where his world, Sterling Global, headlines power, couldn't touch them. He'd sketch her dress designs on napkins, his hand steady, his belief in her fierce. She'd tell him about Savannah, her mother's rose garden, the way art kept her sane, and he'd listen, really listen, like her words were the only deal that mattered. He kept her from his life, though, and she felt it. The absence of his colleagues, his silence about dinners or galas. It's not you, he said one night, his voice heavy, their hands tangled on her couch after closing. My world. They'd chew you up, Brielle. I'm keeping you safe. She nodded, trusting him, but a small ache lingered, a question she didn't voice. When will you let me in? 6 months in, September's heat still clinging to Atlanta, Dorian changed the game. It was a Tuesday, the cafe slow, Nina Simone's voice curling through the air. He didn't come at closing this time, mid-afternoon, surprising her, his tie gone, his sleeves rolled up. "Got an hour?" he asked, his grin boyish, a spark in his eyes she hadn't seen before. She glanced at her manager, who waved her off, smirking. "What's this about?" she asked, untying her apron, her tone teasing but curious, her heart picking up speed. "Trust me," he said, taking her hand, leading her outside. No car, no driver, just them, walking through Little 5 Points, the streets alive with murals and music. He steered her to a small park tucked behind a record store, its benches empty, a willow tree draping shade. The city hummed beyond, but here it was just them. The air warm, his hand steady in hers. He stopped by the tree, turning to face her, his usual ease replaced by something raw, almost nervous. "Brielle," he said, his voice low, deliberate. "I've been thinking about this for weeks. Months, maybe." She tilted her head, her curls loose, her hazel eyes searching his. "Thinking what?" "You're freaking me out, Dorian." He laughed, short and real, but his hands moved to his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Her breath caught, the world narrowing to him, to the way his eyes held hers, steady but vulnerable. He opened it, revealing a ring. A 3-carat sapphire, deep blue, surrounded by diamonds, catching the afternoon light like a promise. Her hand flew to her mouth, not a gasp, but a reflex, her heart pounding. "I don't want cameras," he said, his voice rough with emotion, stepping closer, the box between them. "No spotlight, no crowd, just us. You're the only real thing in my life, Brielle. You always have been. I love you, your laugh, your fire, the way you make me better. Marry me, please." She stared at him, the ring, then back at his face, her eyes burning, not with tears, but with the rush of everything, love, fear, joy. "Dorian," she said, her voice shaking, "you mean this?" "You're sure?" "Never been surer," he said, his hand finding hers, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "I want you, us, forever. No games, no doubts." She laughed, a sound that broke the tension, bright and free, and stepped into him, her arms around his neck. "You're crazy," she said, her voice warm, teasing, but her eyes said yes before her lips did. "Yes. God, yes." He slipped the ring on, his hands trembling just enough to make her smile, and kissed her, deep and slow, the willow's shade their only witness. The city faded, the park a blur, their world just this, his arms, her heartbeat, a promise no one could touch. They sat after, on a bench, her head on his shoulder, the ring heavy but right, talking like always, jazz, dreams, the future. "No big announcement," he said, his voice firm. "Not yet. I want you safe, not a headline." She nodded, understanding, though a small ache flickered. Would he always keep her separate? But his hand in hers, his love so clear, quieted it. "Just us," she said, squeezing his fingers. "That's enough." They walked back, her apron forgotten, the cafe waiting, but everything different now. He'd chosen her, not his world, and she'd chosen him, not his wealth, but his heart. The ring stayed hidden, worn on a chain under her shirt, their secret, their strength, until they were ready to face the glare together. The sedan rolled toward the chateau, Napa's hills falling away, the estate's spires rising like a challenge. Brielle sat back, the gown's silk cool against her skin, Lena's chatter a soft hum beside her. The proposal, that quiet park, Dorian's voice, "You're the only real thing," pulsed in her, a reminder of why she'd endured Celeste's cruelty, the guests' judgment. They'd thrown her out, seen sneakers, and assumed nothing, but they didn't know her, didn't know the love that had brought her here. Dorian was waiting, likely pacing in his suite, unaware of the morning's chaos, trusting her to shine. "You nervous?" Lena asked, squeezing her hand as the chateau's gates came into view. Brielle's smile was slow, sharp, her eyes fierce. "Not nervous," she said, her voice steady, a vow. "Ready." The car stopped, the gates open now, no guards to block her. She stepped out, the gown flowing, her head high, every inch the bride they'd never seen coming. Celeste, the socialite, the moguls. They'd face her now, not as an outsider, but as Brielle Monroe, Dorian's choice, his love. The hall waited, its chandeliers gleaming, and she'd walk through it, not to prove them wrong, but to claim what was hers. The secret was over. The truth would burn brighter than their scorn. Brielle stepped from the sedan, her gown shimmering under the Napa sun, its silk and lace a quiet declaration of who she was. Not the woman in sneakers they'd cast out, but Brielle Monroe, Dorian Sterling's bride. The chateau's gates stood open now, no guards to bar her way, the cobblestone drive stretching toward the grand hall like an invitation. Lena's squeeze of her hand lingered, her friend's voice a low hum of encouragement. Go shake their world. But Brielle's focus was razor-sharp, her hazel eyes burning with resolve. Celeste's sneer, the socialite's whisper, the weight of their judgment. They were fuel now, not wounds. She'd walk back into that hall, claim her place, and let the truth silence them. Dorian was waiting, likely straightening his tie in his suite, unaware of the morning's chaos, his trust in her a steady anchor. The memory of his proposal, "You're the only real thing in my life," thrummed in her chest, a pulse of love that drowned out the chateau's earlier sting. Her smile, sharp and private, promised more than revenge. It promised revelation. The driver hesitated, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. "You sure you don't want me to pull closer, miss?" he asked, his tone cautious, sensing something bigger than a routine drop-off. "I'm good," Brielle said, her voice calm, final, as she adjusted the gown's train, each movement deliberate. "This is exactly where I need to be." She stepped forward, the gravel crunching under her heels, borrowed from Lena, a stark upgrade from her sneakers, and felt the shift, the world bending to meet her. The chateau loomed, its marble facade gleaming, but it wasn't a fortress anymore. It was hers to conquer. As she approached the entrance, her mind flickered back, not to Atlanta's rain or the park where Dorian proposed, but to a quieter moment, months later, when their secret love faced its first real test. The memory was sharp, edged with tension, and it pulled her in, grounding her for the battle ahead. Atlanta's winter was mild, but January brought a chill that seeped into Brielle's small apartment. She and Dorian had settled into a rhythm. Late nights at the Bean and Blossom, weekends on her couch, jazz playing low, their world a bubble they both guarded. The sapphire ring hung on a chain under her shirt, their engagement a secret kept from his empire, her co-workers, even Lena at first. Brielle didn't mind, not really. She understood Dorian's need to shield her from the vultures of his world, the headlines that would twist her into a gold digger or worse. But understanding didn't erase the ache, the quiet question of when their love would step into the light. It was a Saturday, Dorian in town between London meetings, his schedule a rare gap they'd claimed for themselves. They'd planned dinner, her place, takeout, nothing fancy, but he arrived early, his knock sharp, his face tight with something new. She opened the door, her sweater loose, her curls free, and saw it instantly. His jaw set, his brown eyes clouded, not with anger but with weight. "You okay?" she asked, stepping aside, her voice soft but probing, already sensing a shift. He exhaled, shedding his coat, his movements jerky, unlike his usual ease. Not exactly, he said, sinking onto her couch, his hands clasped, elbows on his knees. Vivienne called. She knows. Brielle's stomach tightened, her hand pausing on the fridge door where she'd reached for wine. Vivienne Lowell, Dorian's godmother, wasn't just family. She was a titan, a fashion industry mogul whose name opened doors and closed deals. Her label, Lowell Couture, was a global empire, and her influence over Dorian, orphaned young, was near parental, her approval a currency he'd never fully escaped. Brielle had never met her, but Dorian's stories, sharp, fond, wary, painted a woman who wielded love like a blade. "Knows what?" Brielle asked, though she already guessed, her voice steady as she joined him, sitting close, her knee brushing his. "Us," he said, his eyes meeting hers, raw, almost apologetic. "You. The engagement. I didn't tell her, she found out. Hired someone, probably, to dig. She's not happy." Brielle's fingers curled, the ring's chain cool against her skin, but she kept her face calm, her hazel eyes locked on his. "Not happy how?" she asked, her tone even, though her pulse quickened. "What did she say?" He rubbed his jaw, his voice low, reluctant, like the words burned coming out. "She said you're a nobody. Her words, not mine." His eyes flashed, anger there, not at her but at the memory. "Said marrying you risks everything. My name, the company, her legacy. She's threatening to pull her shares, cut me out of her will, disinherit me if I don't walk away." The air stilled, his words landing heavy, a threat not just to him but to them. Brielle's chest tightened, not with fear but with a fierce, quiet defiance. She'd known his world would push back, had felt its edges in his silences, his need to protect her. But this, Vivienne's ultimatum, was a line drawn, a test of their love against power's weight. "A nobody," she repeated, her voice low, almost a laugh, but her eyes burned, unyielding. "That's what she thinks I am." Dorian's hand found hers, his grip tight, urgent. "She's wrong, Brielle. You're everything. More than her, more than any of it. I told her that. Told her I'd rather lose it all than lose you." Her throat caught, his words hitting deep, stirring the love she'd leaned into since that rainy night. But doubt flickered, small but sharp. Could he really walk away from his world? She pulled her hand back, not breaking his gaze, her voice steady but raw. "You mean that, Dorian? Because I don't need your money, your name, none of it. But I won't be your secret forever. I need to know you'll fight for us, no matter who's pulling strings." He leaned closer, his hands framing her face, his eyes fierce, no hesitation. "I'm fighting," he said, his voice rough, a vow. "Vivienne can threaten all she wants. She doesn't own me. You're my home, Brielle, my future. I'm not letting her or anyone take that." She searched his face, seeing the man who'd knelt in that park, who'd chosen her over cameras and crowds. The ache eased, her trust in him solidifying, but Vivienne's shadow lingered, a threat unspoken but real. "What's she gonna do?" she asked, her voice quieter now, practical. "If you don't back down?" Dorian's jaw tightened, his hands dropping to his knees. "She'll try to make it hurt," he said, honest, unflinching. "Pull her influence, maybe leak something to the press, make it hard for us. But I've got my own moves. Sterling Global's mine, not hers. She can't break me." Brielle nodded, her mind racing, not with fear but strategy. She'd faced worse than moguls, years of scraping by, judgment for her skin, her dreams, and survived. "Then we face her together," she said, her voice firm, a spark in her eyes. "No hiding. I'm not afraid of her, Dorian." He smiled, small but real, his hand finding hers again, squeezing. "I know you're not," he said, his voice warm, proud. "That's why I love you." They sat there, takeout forgotten, jazz playing low, planning not just dinner but a future. Vivienne was a storm, but they were stronger, their love a quiet fortress. Dorian didn't call her bluff that night, but he didn't bend either. And Brielle felt it, their bond tightening, ready for whatever came. The ring on its chain, hidden but heavy, was their secret weapon, a promise no threat could touch. The chateau's entrance loomed, its double doors open, music and laughter spilling out. Brielle paused, her gown flowing, her heels steady on the cobblestone. The memory of Vivienne's threat, "Do you want to be disinherited?" echoed, not as doubt but as clarity. Dorian had chosen her then, against his godmother's power, just as he'd choose her today. Celeste, the socialite, the guests, they were smaller threats, their scorn a shadow compared to Vivienne's. But Brielle wasn't the same woman who'd stood in that Atlanta apartment, weighing risks. She was the bride, Dorian's equal, and no one, not a planner, not a mogul, would take that from her. She stepped forward, the hall's light catching her gown, turning silk to fire. A staff member at the door froze, eyes widening, recognition dawning but unsure. "Ma'am," he stammered, half reaching for a guest list. "Brielle Monroe," she said, her voice clear, unyielding, her smile sharp. "I'm expected." He nodded, stepping aside, and she crossed the threshold, the chateau's hum swallowing her heart a drum of anticipation. Vivienne might be inside, her threat alive in every glance, but Brielle was ready, not just to face her, but to claim her place. Dorian waited, their love a truth no one could break, and when they saw her, the world would shift. Brielle crossed the chateau's threshold, her gown catching the light of the grand hall, silk and lace shimmering like a quiet defiance. The staff member's hesitant nod lingered in her mind, his uncertainty a crack in the chateau's polished facade, but she moved forward, her heels steady, her hazel eyes sharp with purpose. The hum of the wedding, music, laughter, the clink of crystal swirled around her, but she felt the weight of unseen eyes, the ripple of her presence already stirring the crowd. Celeste's sneer, the socialite's whisper, the gates that had shut her out, they were nothing compared to the truth she carried. She was Brielle Monroe, Dorian Sterling's bride, and this was her day. Vivienne's threat, "Do you want to be disinherited?" echoed from that Atlanta night, a shadow that hadn't faded. Dorian had chosen her then, against his godmother's power, and he'd choose her now. But Brielle knew Vivienne wasn't done. The mogul's silence since that call was too heavy, too deliberate, a storm waiting to break. A waiter passed, his tray wobbling as he caught her gaze, recognition flickering before he hurried on. Brielle's lips curved, a private smile, not for him but for the moment. Her return, her transformation from sneakers to silk. Dorian was somewhere in the chateau, likely adjusting his cufflinks, his calm voice a contrast to her racing pulse. She'd texted him, ready to shake things up, and his reply, "Can't wait to see you," was a tether, pulling her through the hall's opulence toward him. But Vivienne's shadow clung, a reminder that love, even theirs, wasn't untouchable. The memory of that threat and the fight it sparked called to her, sharpening her for what lay ahead. Winter had hardened in Atlanta, February's chill seeping into Brielle's bones as she locked up the bean and blossom, Dorian waiting under the awning, his breath visible in the cold. Vivienne's ultimatum, marry a nobody and risk everything, had hung over them for weeks, a blade neither could ignore. Dorian hadn't backed down, his calls with his godmother sharp but private, his resolve clear in the way he held Brielle's hand, his thumb brushing her knuckles like a vow. But Vivienne wasn't a woman to lose quietly, and Brielle felt it, a pressure building, her instincts honed from years of navigating judgment. That night they'd walked to her apartment, the city quiet, their steps in sync. "She's planning something," Dorian said, his voice low, breaking the silence as they reached her door. His eyes, usually warm, were clouded, his jaw tight. She didn't push again, didn't call. That's not her. She's too still. Brielle leaned against the frame, her scarf loose, her hazel eyes searching his. "What's her move, then?" she asked, her tone steady, practical, though her heart thudded. "She can't force you to leave me." He exhaled, rubbing his neck, his coat open despite the cold. "No, but she can hurt us," he said, honest, unflinching. "Her shares in Sterling Global, she's hinting at selling, tanking the stock. Or worse, she'll go public, spin a story. Make you the villain, me the fool." Brielle's lips pressed tight, anger flaring, not at him but at Vivienne's reach, her need to control. "Let her try," she said, her voice low, fierce. "I'm not some headline, Dorian, and you're not her puppet." He stepped closer, his hands finding her shoulders, his eyes softening but no less determined. "I know," he said, his voice warm, a spark in the cold. "I'm not letting her win. But we need to be smart, stay quiet, keep our plans close. She's watching." She nodded, her hand covering his, the ring's chain a secret weight under her sweater. "We've been quiet," she said, a half smile breaking through. "I'm good at that, but I'm not hiding forever." His laugh was soft, real, easing the tension. "You won't have to," he said, pulling her into a kiss, quick but deep, sealing their pact. They'd face Vivienne, not with fear, but with strategy, their love a shield no mogul could pierce. Inside, they planned, small wedding, private, away from her glare. Brielle didn't care about pomp. She wanted him, their truth, nothing else. But Vivienne's silence grew louder, her absence a warning. Brielle felt it in the weeks that followed, a sense of being watched, her shifts at the cafe heavier, like eyes lingered beyond the counter. Dorian's trips grew tense, his phone buzzing with calls he took in private, his voice low, clipped. "She's circling," he told her once, late, his arm around her as jazz played. "But she won't break us." Brielle believed him, but the air felt charged, Vivienne's power a threat they couldn't fully map. The chateau's grand hall swallowed Brielle, its chandeliers casting prisms across her gown, the crowd's murmur rising as heads turned. She moved forward, her steps measured, her smile a quiet blade. The guests, moguls, tycoons, faces from magazines, watched, some curious, some dismissive, none knowing her truth. She scanned for Dorian, her heart a steady drum, but caught Celeste instead, the planner near the floral arches, her blonde bob sharp, her eyes narrowing as they landed on Brielle. No recognition yet, just suspicion, a flicker of unease in her rigid posture. Brielle's gaze shifted, landing on a woman across the hall, tall, silver-haired, her black gown severe, diamonds glinting at her throat. Vivienne Lowell. Even from here, her presence was a force, her eyes scanning the room like a hawk, missing nothing. Brielle's breath caught Vivienne's threat, a nobody, echoing. But she straightened, her gown a shield, her love for Dorian a fire. Vivienne hadn't broken them then, and she wouldn't now. But the mogul's gaze lingered, heavy with intent, a storm ready to strike. Celeste moved first, striding toward Brielle, her heels clicking, her voice low but sharp. "You again?" she said, stopping short, her eyes raking over the gown, confusion cracking her composure. "I told you to leave. How did you get back in?" Brielle met her stare, unflinching, her voice calm, deliberate. "I'm exactly where I belong," she said, each word a step toward truth. "You made a mistake this morning, Celeste, a big one." Celeste's lips parted, a retort forming, but a murmur from the crowd cut her off. Guests whispering, pointing, their eyes on Brielle's gown, its elegance undeniable. Vivienne's head turned, her gaze locking on Brielle, sharp and cold, a predator spotting prey. Brielle felt it, the weight of her plan, the hidden threat unfolding. She didn't know how, but Vivienne's hand was in this. The planner's hostility, the morning's chaos, a design to keep her out, to break her. Flashback to weeks before the wedding, Vivienne hadn't stayed silent after all. In a Manhattan penthouse, her voice silk over steel, she'd met Celeste, the planner hired for the sterling wedding. "Ensure the bride doesn't reach the altar," she'd said, sliding an envelope across the table, thick with cash. "No questions. Make it clean. Confusion, delays, anything to stop her." Celeste, ambitious, hungry for Vivienne's favor, had nodded, her smile tight, already plotting. Brielle's gown, too, had been targeted. Vivienne's call to the designer, Leila Moreau, a Lowell Couture protégé, had been brief, brutal. "Lose the dress," she'd said, her tone leaving no room for dissent. "Misplace it, ruin it. I don't care. She doesn't wear it." Lila, torn but cowed, had agreed, claiming a mix-up, leaving Brielle's fitting cancelled, the gown missing. Lena's quick thinking, borrowing a sample from another shop, had saved her, but the intent was clear. Vivienne wanted Brielle gone, humiliated, erased. Now, in the hall, Brielle stood tall, the gown a defiance of Vivienne's scheme. Celeste faltered, her hand twitching toward her radio, but Brielle stepped closer, her voice low, cutting. "Call security again," she said, her smile sharp, "and you'll regret it more than you did this morning." The crowd's whispers grew, Vivienne's gaze a blade across the room, and Brielle felt the trap tightening. Not just Celeste's, but Vivienne's, a plot to strip her of this moment. Dorian was close, she sensed it, his love her anchor, but Vivienne's move was bold, desperate, a last stand to keep her out. Brielle's heart raced not with fear, but with clarity. She'd fight, not just for herself, but for them, for the love they'd built against all odds. Brielle stood in the chateau's grand hall, her gown a radiant defiance against the weight of Vivienne's scheme. The crowd's whispers swirled, curious, judging, a tide of eyes tracking her every move. But her hazel gaze held steady, locked on Celeste, whose composure cracked under the truth Brielle carried. "Call security again," Brielle had said, her voice a quiet blade, "and you'll regret it more than you did this morning." Celeste's hand froze on her radio, her eyes darting, caught between obedience to Vivienne's bribe and the dawning realization that Brielle wasn't the outsider she'd assumed. Across the room, Vivienne Lowell stood like a statue, her silver hair gleaming, her black gown stark against the hall's opulence. Her smile was faint, controlled, but her eyes burned into Brielle, a predator scenting resistance. The air crackled, Vivienne's plot, bribing Celeste, sabotaging the gown, unfurling like a trap, yet Brielle felt no fear, only fire. She was the bride, Dorian's love, and no mogul's machinations would steal this day. The crowd parted slightly, their murmurs sharpening. Who is she? That dress? As Brielle took a step forward, her heels echoing, her gown catching the chandelier's light. Celeste stammered, "You can't just—" But Brielle cut her off with a look, not cruel but unyielding, a promise of reckoning. Vivienne's gaze never wavered, her smile tightening, and Brielle knew the mogul's hand was still moving pieces, her threat from Atlanta. Marry a nobody and risk everything, alive in this moment. Dorian was near, likely at the altar, waiting, trusting her, and she'd reach him, no matter what Vivienne threw next. The memory of their love, their fight against his godmother's shadow, surged in her, a beacon pulling her through the hall's chaos. Atlanta's spring had been soft, March blooming with promise, but Vivienne's threat had cast a chill over Brielle and Dorian's engagement. They'd kept their plans tight, small wedding, secret, a shield against her influence, but her silence was a weapon, her moves hidden until they struck. One night in Brielle's apartment, Dorian had paced, his phone dark after a call with his godmother. "She's backing off," he'd said, his voice skeptical, his brown eyes clouded. "Says she'll respect my choice. It's too easy." Brielle, sketching a dress at her table, had looked up, her pencil stilling. "She's not done," she'd said, her voice calm but certain, her instincts sharp from years of reading people's masks. "She's waiting, Dorian, for the right moment." He'd stopped, his hand rubbing his jaw, nodding. "You're right," he'd said, crossing to her, his hand on her shoulder, warm, grounding. "But we're stronger. She can't touch what we've got." She'd smiled, leaning into him, the sapphire ring on its chain a quiet vow between them. "Let her try," she'd said, her voice low, fierce. "I'm not running." They'd kissed, slow and sure, their love a fortress, but the air held a charge, Vivienne's shadow a weight they couldn't fully shake. The chateau's halls seemed to pulse, the crowd's whispers now a low roar as Brielle moved toward the altar's entrance, a set of arched doors at the far end, draped in roses, her roses, the one detail she'd fought for. She felt Dorian beyond them, his presence a pull, but the path wasn't clear. Celeste rallied, stepping into her way, her voice rising, desperate to regain control. "You need to leave," she said, loud enough for nearby guests to turn, her hand signaling a guard who hesitated, eyes flicking between them. "This is a private event and you're not on the list." Brielle's smile was slow, sharp, her voice carrying just enough to reach the crowd. "Check the list again, Celeste," she said, her tone calm, cutting. "You'll find Brielle Monroe." The bride A, gasp rippled, head swiveling, the word bride a spark in dry grass. Celeste's face paled, her radio slipping slightly, but she doubled down, her voice shrill. "That's impossible. The bride's already—" She stopped, catching herself, but the slip was enough. A crack Brielle seized. "Already what?" Brielle asked, stepping closer, her gown flowing, her eyes locked on Celeste's. "Go on. Say it." The crowd leaned in, their whispers frantic. "The bride? Her? What's happening?" And Brielle felt the shift, the hall tilting in her favor. Vivienne moved then, gliding through the guests, her presence parting them like a blade. She stopped beside Celeste, her voice silk, deadly calm. "There's been a misunderstanding," she said, her eyes on Brielle, cold, measuring. "This young woman is confused. Let's not disrupt the day." Brielle's heart thudded, Vivienne's words a velvet glove over iron, her plot clear now. Not just to bar her, but to erase her, to paint her as a fraud before Dorian could claim her. She held Vivienne's gaze unflinching, her voice steady, loud enough for all to hear. "I'm not confused, Miss Lowell. I'm exactly where I belong. Ask Dorian. He'll tell you." The name dropped like a stone, the crowd's murmurs spiking. "Dorian? She knows him?" And Vivienne's smile flickered, a hairline crack in her armor. Celeste, caught, looked to Vivienne, then away, her hands trembling. The guard stepped back, unsure, the air thick with tension, a standoff no one had expected. Beyond the doors the altar waited, and Dorian stood there. Brielle knew, his black tux sharp, his eyes likely scanning for her, his calm masking a growing unease. The ceremony was set to start, the string quartet's notes drifting through, but she wasn't there, and the guests inside, moguls, tycoons, Dorian's allies, were stirring, their voices a low hum of doubt. A woman in emerald silk leaned toward her companion, her whisper sharp. Did she get cold feet? Poor Dorian. Another, a man with a silver cane, murmured back, "Wouldn't blame her. Sterling's a lot to handle." Laughter followed, light but cruel, and the murmurs grew. No bride? What's the delay? Each one a needle, pricking at Dorian's calm. He stood tall, his hands clasped, his face composed, but his eyes flicked to the doors, searching. The officiant, a gray-haired man, leaned close, his voice low. "Should we wait, Mr. Sterling? Guests are wondering." Dorian's jaw tightened, his voice firm, quiet. "We wait," he said, his gaze steady, trusting her, believing she'd come. He didn't know about Celeste, Vivienne, the gown, but he knew Brielle, her fire, her heart, and he'd stand there all day if he had to. Vivienne in the hall smiled, a curve of triumph, her eyes on Brielle like she'd already won. She'd planned this, bribed Celeste to block her, ensured the gown vanished, counting on Brielle's absence to unravel Dorian's choice, to prove her right. A nobody couldn't stand in her world. The guests' murmurs were her music, their doubt her victory. But Brielle wasn't gone, wasn't broken. Brielle stepped forward, past Celeste, toward the doors, her gown a beacon, her voice rising, clear, unshaken. "I'm going to my fiancé," she said, not to Vivienne but to the crowd, her words a spark. "Anyone who wants to stop me, try." The crowd parted, stunned, their whispers chaotic. "Fiancé? Is she serious?" And Vivienne's smile froze, her hands clenching, her plot teetering. Celeste backed away, her radio silent, her role exposed. The guard stood frozen, caught in the tide. Brielle reached the doors, her hand on the handle, the roses brushing her arm, and felt Dorian's presence, his love, pulling her through. Vivienne's threat was real, her power vast, but Brielle was more. A woman who'd fought for this, who'd earned it, and no one would delay her love today. Brielle's hand rested on the handle of the chateau's arched doors, the roses brushing her arm, their soft pink a quiet anchor in the storm of whispers behind her. The crowd's murmurs, "Fiancé? Is she serious?" swirled, a tide of shock and doubt, but her hazel eyes stayed forward, her gown shimmering under the chandelier's glow. Vivienne's frozen smile, Celeste's retreat, the guard's hesitation. They were cracks in a plan meant to bury her, but Brielle stood unbroken, her voice still ringing. "I'm going to my fiancé. Anyone who wants to stop me, try." The hall held its breath, the weight of her truth shifting the air, and she felt Dorian beyond the doors, waiting at the altar, his trust in her a pulse, stronger than Vivienne's schemes. Celeste's bribe, the lost gown, Vivienne's cold triumph. They'd delayed her, humiliated her, but they wouldn't stop her. She was Brielle Monroe, the bride, and this moment was hers to claim. Vivienne's eyes bored into her, a flicker of panic beneath her composure, her hands clenched tight, diamonds glinting like teeth. The mogul had counted on Brielle's absence, on the guests' murmurs. Did she get cold feet? To unravel Dorian's choice, to prove her right. A nobody had no place here. But Brielle was here, her gown a defiance, her love a fire no bribe could dim. Celeste, cornered, clutched her radio, her face pale, caught in the lie she'd been paid to spin. The crowd leaned in, their whispers chaotic, sensing a shift. Something bigger than a wedding was breaking open. Brielle pushed the door, the quartet's notes spilling out, but a memory flashed sharp and steadying. Dorian's voice, months ago, promising her against Vivienne's threat. "She can't break us." That Atlanta night had forged their resolve, and it carried her now, her heart a drum as she prepared to step through. But the game wasn't over. Vivienne's reach was long, and Brielle sensed another move, a final play to keep her from the altar. Spring had deepened in Atlanta, April's warmth softening the city, but Vivienne's shadow hung heavy over Brielle and Dorian. They'd planned their wedding quietly, a private vow to outmaneuver his godmother's threats. disinheritance, stock games, press leaks. Dorian had tightened his circle, trusting only his assistant, Reed Harper, a wiry man with sharp eyes and unshakable loyalty. Reed knew about Brielle, the ring, their love, and kept their secret, a firewall against Vivienne's spies. "She's watching," Dorian had told Brielle one night, his arm around her, jazz playing low. "But Reed's got my back. We're safe." Brielle had nodded, her hand on the ring's chain, trusting Dorian's faith in Reed. "Safe's not enough," she'd said, her voice firm, her hazel eyes fierce. "I want us free, her out of our way for good." He'd kissed her, slow, certain. "We will be," he'd said, his voice a vow. "She'll slip, and we'll be ready." They'd laughed then, planning a life beyond her reach. A house, kids, her designs in galleries, his empire theirs to reshape. But Vivienne's silence was a blade, and Brielle felt it, waiting for the cut. The chateau's altar room lay just beyond the doors, Dorian standing tall, his black tux sharp, his hands clasped to hide the slight tremor only he knew. The guests inside, moguls, tycoons, faces of power, shifted in their seats, their murmurs growing sharper. "No bride yet," a woman in gold whispered, her fan fluttering. "Sterling's been stood up, hasn't he?" Another, a tech baron, leaned back, smirking. "Bold move, ditching a billionaire." Dorian's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the doors, his calm a mask over the ache building inside. He trusted Brielle, knew her heart. "You're the only real thing," but the delay gnawed. Vivienne's smile in the crowd, a splinter he couldn't ignore. She sat near the front, her black gown stark, her face serene, her triumph quiet but clear. She'd planned this. He sensed it. Celeste's odd insistence on guest list issues, the staff's vague answers about Brielle's whereabouts. His hand twitched, wanting his phone, but Reed was out there, checking, and Dorian clung to that, to her, to them. Outside, Reed Harper moved fast, his lean frame weaving through the chateau's service corridors, his phone clutched tight. He'd been Dorian's shadow for years, his loyalty forged in late-night deals and crises, and he knew Vivienne's game, her threats, her moves, her need to control. That morning he'd caught a glitch. Celeste's orders to security, barring a disruptive guest in sneakers, hadn't matched Dorian's brief. Brielle was checking flowers, nothing more. Reed's gut had screamed, and he dug, hacking into Celeste's unsecured tablet during a break, his fingers flying over encrypted messages. What he found stopped him cold. Texts between Celeste and Vivienne, blunt, damning. "Keep her out. Any means. Payment wired." Vivienne's next message hours ago. "No gown, no entry. She's done." Reed's breath hissed, rage flaring, not just at Vivienne, but at himself for missing it sooner. The gown's loss, Lila Moreau's stammered excuse, clicked into place, a sabotage Vivienne had orchestrated with Celeste as her pawn. Reed screenshot the texts, his mind racing. Brielle was here, somewhere, and he had to find her before Vivienne's plan sealed shut. He sprinted toward the grand hall, his shoes skidding on marble, staff scattering as he pushed through. The crowd's hum grew louder, and he caught sight of her. Brielle, in a gown that wasn't Lila's, silk and lace glowing, facing Celeste. Vivienne nearby, her smile a mask of victory. Reed's heart leapt. She'd fought through, but the doors were still closed, the altar moments away. He shoved forward, his voice sharp, cutting through the noise. "Brielle!" She turned, her eyes finding his, recognition flashing, trust instant. The crowd stirred, Vivienne's head snapping toward Reed, her smile faltering, sensing a shift. Celeste flinched, her radio dropping, her role exposed. Reed reached Brielle, breathless, his phone out, the texts ready. "It's Vivienne," he said, low, urgent, his eyes flicking to the mogul. She paid Celeste to block you, trashed the gown. I've got proof. Brielle's jaw tightened, her gaze darting to Vivienne, then back to Reed, her voice steady, fierce. Show me, she said, taking the phone, her eyes scanning the messages. No gown, no entry. Each word a nail in Vivienne's plan. The crowd hushed, sensing drama, their whispers frantic. What's happening? Who's that man? And Brielle felt the tide turn, her truth no longer hers alone. You're sure this holds? She asked Reed, her voice low, her hands steady, the gown a shield against the hall's glare. Solid, Reed said, his eyes hard, loyal. Dorian needs to know. Now. Brielle nodded, her smile sharp, not bitter but alive, a spark of justice. Then let's get to him, she said, turning back to the doors, her hand firm on the handle. Vivienne stepped forward, her voice smooth, a last grasp at control. This is a mistake, she said, loud enough for the crowd, her eyes on Brielle, cold, commanding. You're embarrassing yourself. Brielle met her gaze, unflinching, her voice clear, carrying. The only mistake was yours, Vivienne, she said, her words a blade, the texts a weapon in her hand. You don't decide my place. She pushed the doors, the quartet's music swelling, Dorian's silhouette ahead, waiting, trusting. The crowd gasped, Vivienne's face paling, Celeste shrinking back, the truth breaking free. Reed stayed close, his phone ready to show Dorian, the guests' murmurs a storm. She's the bride? Vivienne did what? And Brielle walked forward, her gown blazing, her love unbroken. Vivienne's plot had failed, exposed, but the wedding wasn't won yet. The altar a step away, Dorian's eyes searching for her, the twist of truth reshaping everything. Brielle pushed through the chateau's arched doors, the swell of the string quartet washing over her, her gown a beacon of silk and lace under the altar room's golden light. Reed's urgent words, it's Vivienne. She paid Celeste to block you, trash the gown, burned in her mind, the damning texts on his phone a lifeline clutched in her hand. The crowd's gasps followed her, a tidal wave of shock. She's the bride. Vivienne did what? But her hazel eyes sought only Dorian, standing at the altar, his black tux sharp, his broad shoulders steady despite the flicker of worry in his brown gaze. Vivienne's plot had unraveled, Celeste's bribe exposed, the lost gown a lie Brielle had overcome, but the weight of the morning, sneakers, scorn, locked gates, pressed against her chest, a bruise she carried even now. She was Brielle Monroe, Dorian's love, and no mogul's schemes could steal that. Yet the hall's whispers, Vivienne's cold stare, lingered like a challenge unmet. She stepped forward, Reed at her side, the phone's evidence a spark ready to ignite, her heart a drum beating for Dorian, for truth, for them. The altar room hummed, guests shifting in their seats, their murmurs sharp. Where's she been? Sterling's waiting too long, and Vivienne sat near the front, her silver hair gleaming, her smile gone, replaced by a taut mask of calculation. Celeste had vanished into the crowd, her role as Vivienne's pawn laid bare, but Brielle felt the mogul's reach, a shadow still clawing for control. Dorian's eyes found hers, relief flashing, then confusion as he saw Reed, the phone, her fierce expression. She was almost there, the roses lining the aisle her touchstone, when a voice, Vivienne's, silk over steel, cut through, a last desperate play. This is a mistake, she'd said, but Brielle's reply, the only mistake was yours, had silenced her, the truth breaking free. Now she'd reach Dorian, show him the texts and end this. But the path felt fragile, Vivienne's defeat too sudden to trust. Atlanta's summer had been heavy, June's heat pressing against Brielle's skin as she and Dorian planned their escape. A wedding far from Vivienne's grip, a life where their love could breathe. Reed had been their shield, filtering calls, guarding their secret. But Vivienne's silence grew louder, her threat. You marry a nobody and risk everything. A ghost they couldn't shake. One night, Dorian had held her, his voice low, certain. She'll lose, he'd said, his hand on the ring's chain, her sapphire hidden but heavy. We're too strong. Brielle had smiled, kissing him, believing him, but her instincts, honed from years of reading people's edges, whispered caution. She's not done, she'd said, her hazel eyes searching his. She's waiting for us to slip. He'd nodded, pulling her close, jazz playing soft. Then we don't slip, he'd said, and they'd laughed, planning a future, her designs, his dreams, a house by water. But Vivienne's shadow clung, and Brielle felt it, a pressure building, ready to crack. The chateau's altar loomed. Dorian steps away, his eyes locked on Brielle, a question in their depths. Why the delay? Are you okay? But trust held him steady, his hands clasped, waiting for her. The guest's whispers grew. She's here, but what's wrong? Look at Vivienne's face, and Brielle felt the room tilt, her gown aflame in the dim, her resolve iron. Reed stayed close, his phone out, the texts a weapon she'd hand Dorian, proof of Vivienne's betrayal. But as she neared, a new weight hit, a memory not of Atlanta but of this morning, sharper, raw. The gates, Celeste's sneer, the socialites' laugh. Why do they let staff wander? And a doubt, small but piercing, took root. Had Dorian known? Had he let her walk into this trap, unaware, unprotected? She faltered, her step slowing, the roses blurring. Reed caught it, his voice low, urgent. Brielle, keep going. He's waiting. But her eyes flicked to Vivienne, then Dorian, the texts heavy in her hand. The crowd's hum pressed in, and she saw it, her sneakers, her exit, the humiliation, and a thought, reckless, searing, gripped her. What if I leave? Not forever, not him, but this, Vivienne's game, the chateau's glare, a world that didn't want her. She could slip away, vanish before the altar, let them choke on their assumptions. Her hand tightened on the phone, her breath shallow, the doors behind her a pull, not to escape Dorian, but to reclaim herself. She loved him, God she did, but the morning's wounds bled, and Vivienne's smile, even now, mocked her. She turned, not fully, just a glance at the hall, the exit beyond, and Reed saw it, his eyes widening. Brielle, he said, stepping closer, his voice sharp, grounding. Don't. She met his gaze, her voice a whisper, raw. Why not? They didn't want me here. Maybe they're right. Reed's hand gripped her arm, not hard but firm, his eyes fierce, loyal. He didn't abandon you, he said, his words cutting through her doubt, urgent, true. They never let you in. Vivienne, Celeste, they rigged it. Dorian didn't know. Look at him. She followed his gaze, Dorian's face clear now, his worry breaking through his calm, his eyes searching hers, pleading, come to me. The texts in her hand burned, Vivienne's words, keep her out. She's done, a lie she'd almost believed. Her doubt wavered, Reed's voice an anchor, pulling her back to the man who'd knelt in a park, who'd fought his godmother, who'd chosen her against the world. I need to show him, she said, her voice steadying, her grip on the phone tightening. He deserves the truth. Reed nodded, releasing her, his smile small, fierce. Go, he said, stepping back, his eyes flicking to Vivienne, who stood now, her face pale, sensing defeat. The crowd's whispers spiked. What's she holding? Is that Sterling's assistant? And Brielle turned forward, her gown flowing, her steps sure again. The altar was close, Dorian's hand reaching, his voice low, breaking through the quartet's hum. Brielle, he said, her name a vow, a question, a home. She reached him, her hand finding his. The phone passed between them, her voice low, fierce. "Vivienne tried to stop me," she said, her eyes locked on his. No tears, just fire. "Reed found this. Look." He took it, his brow furrowing, his eyes scanning the texts. Payment wired. No gown, no entry. And his face hardened, not with shock but rage, controlled, deep. "She did this," he said, his voice a growl, his hand tightening on hers. "To you?" "To us," Brielle said, her voice steady, her gown a shield, the crowd's hum distant now. Vivienne stood frozen, her plan exposed, the guests' eyes darting between them, sensing a reckoning. Dorian's gaze lifted, finding his godmother, his jaw set, but he turned back to Brielle, his hand cupping her face, his voice soft, unshaken. "You're here," he said, his eyes warm, fierce. "That's all that matters." She nodded, her doubt gone. Reed's words. He didn't abandon you, true in Dorian's touch. His love, a truth no plot could break. The officiant cleared his throat. The quartet paused, the guests hushed, waiting. But Brielle felt only him, their bond stronger than Vivienne's schemes. The wedding could wait a moment. They'd face her together, the texts a blade to end her reign. But first, they stood hand in hand, the bride no one could keep out. Brielle stood at the altar, her hand in Dorian's, the warmth of his touch anchoring her against the chateau's golden light. The phone passed between them, burned with Vivienne's betrayal, texts exposing her bribe to Celeste, her sabotage of the gown, her cold command to keep Brielle out. Payment wired, no gown, no entry. Dorian's eyes, dark with controlled fury, had scanned the words, his jaw tight, but his voice was soft, steady, for her alone. "You're here. That's all that matters." The crowd's whispers. "What's she holding? Is that Sterling's assistant?" Faded, the guests' eyes darting between them, Vivienne's pale face a silent admission of defeat. Reed lingered nearby, his sharp gaze on the mogul, his loyalty a quiet shield. Brielle's doubt, that fleeting urge to flee, to leave the chateau's scorn behind, had dissolved under Reed's words. "He didn't abandon you. They never let you in." She was Brielle Monroe, the bride, and no trap, no gate could steal this moment from her. The officiant shifted, his throat clearing softly, a signal to begin. But Dorian's hand tightened on hers, his eyes searching, asking, "Are you ready?" She nodded, her hazel gaze fierce, no tears, just fire, her love for him a truth brighter than Vivienne's schemes. The roses lining the aisle, her roses, caught the light, a nod to her mother, to her fight. To this day she'd earned. Vivienne sat rigid, her diamonds glinting, her power cracked but not gone, and Brielle knew the mogul's silence was no surrender. A cornered predator was still dangerous. But here with Dorian she was untouchable, their bond a vow no one could break. Atlanta's summer had faded into fall, September's breeze carrying a promise of change, but Vivienne's shadow had clung to Brielle and Dorian, her threat a weight they'd carried through every plan. They'd chosen Napa, the chateau, for its quiet beauty, a place to claim their love away from her reach. Reed had scouted it, his voice steady over coffee one night. "It's secure, private. She'll hate it." Brielle had laughed, her hand on Dorian's, the ring's chain warm against her skin. "Good," she'd said, her voice fierce, her eyes bright. "Let her hate something she can't touch." Dorian had pulled her close, his smile real, rare. "You're unstoppable," he'd said, kissing her, and she'd believed him, their love a fire no mogul could dim. But Vivienne's silence had been too perfect, and Brielle's instincts, sharp from years of reading people's edges, had whispered, "She's still coming." They'd been ready, or so they'd thought, but the chateau's gates, Celeste's sneer, had proved her reach longer than they'd known. The chateau's altar room pulsed, the quartet's notes paused, the guests' whispers a low hum of anticipation. Dorian turned to the officiant, his voice low, firm. "Give us a moment," he said, his hand still in Brielle's, guiding her to the side, away from the altar's glare. The crowd stirred, their murmurs sharpening. What now? Is she backing out? And Vivienne's eyes narrowed, her hands folded, waiting, hoping for a crack. Brielle's breath caught, not from doubt, but from the weight of what came next. The gown, Lena's save, not Lila's, felt wrong now, a borrowed shield when she needed her own. Reed's proof had shattered Vivienne's plot, but the morning's wounds, sneakers, scorn, staff, lingered, a bruise she couldn't ignore. She looked at Dorian, his face open, trusting, and spoke, her voice low, raw. "I need to do this my way," she said, her hand squeezing his. "Not their way. Not even yours." His brow furrowed, but his eyes held no fear, only faith. "Whatever you need," he said, his voice steady. "A vow. I'm here." She nodded, her smile small, fierce, and turned not to the altar but back to the doors, her steps quick, the crowd gasping. "She's leaving? Sterling's alone again?" Vivienne's lips curving, a flicker of triumph. Reed moved to follow, but Brielle raised a hand, stopping him, her voice clear. "I'm coming back," she said, not just to him but to the room, her words a promise cutting through the hum. The doors closed behind her, the hall's light fading, her gown trailing like a ghost. Outside, Lena waited in the sedan, her eyes wide as Brielle emerged, no hesitation in her stride. "Girl, what's happening?" Lena asked, leaping out, her voice high, worried. "You're not running, are you?" "Not running," Brielle said, her voice calm, a spark in her eyes. "Changing. I need something else. Something me." She climbed into the car, directing the driver to a vintage shop she'd spotted in Napa, a place Lena had mentioned, small, tucked away. Nothing like the chateau's gloss. "They'll have it," she said, her certainty unshaken, her heart set on a truth only she could shape. The shop was dim, its racks heavy with history, velvet, satin, stories in every stitch. Brielle moved fast, her fingers skimming fabrics, Lena trailing, half confused, half amazed. "You're insane," Lena said, holding up a beaded gown, but Brielle shook her head, her eyes landing on it. A simple white dress, cotton and lace, sleeveless, flowing, something her mother might have worn, something she'd sketched in Atlanta's quiet nights. She held it up, the fit perfect, no mirror needed, her smile sharp, alive. "This," she said, paying quickly, changing in the shop's back room, the borrowed gown folded away, the white dress soft against her skin, her curls loose, no veil, just her. Lena clapped, tears in her eyes. "You're a damn queen," she said, and Brielle laughed, the sound free, her doubt gone, her truth clear. The sedan sped back, the chateau's gates open, no Celeste to block her now. Brielle stepped out, the white dress catching the breeze, simple but radiant, her hazel eyes blazing. The crowd outside, staff, stragglers, stilled, their whispers dying as she walked, not to the service entrance but the main doors, her head high, every step a claim. The hall waited, and she'd walk in, not as Vivienne's target, not as Celeste's mistake, but as Brielle, the bride Dorian loved, the woman no one could erase. She entered, the grand hall falling silent, a wave of awe swallowing the murmurs. Guests froze, glasses midair, eyes wide. Who is she? That dress, the chateau's opulence dimmed by her presence. Dorian, at the altar, turned, his breath catching, his eyes finding hers, love and pride flooding his face. Vivienne stood, her face pale, her hands clenched, her triumph ashes now. Celeste was gone, Reed nodding from the side, his phone still ablade if needed. The quartet paused, the officiant stepping back, and Brielle walked, the white dress flowing. No train, no fuss, just her, every step a victory. The silence held, not cold but reverent, the crowd sensing truth. Her truth, their love, a story they hadn't known but couldn't deny. A woman in sapphire whispered, "She's the bride," her voice soft, stunned, and others nodded, their doubt melting. Vivienne's gaze burned, but Brielle didn't look, her eyes on Dorian, his hand outstretched, his smile her home. She reached him, her hand slipping into his, the white dress a quiet fire, her voice low, for him alone. "This is me," she said, her eyes warm, fierce. "All I've got." "It's everything," he said, his voice rough, love raw, and pulled her close, the crowd fading, their world just them. The officiant moved, ready now, but Brielle felt it. The hall's silence, Dorian's heartbeat, her mother's roses in the air. A moment no one could steal, a walk-in no one could forget. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself in a room full of people waiting for you to fail? Share it with us below. Your story may inspire someone today. Brielle stood at the altar, her hand in Dorian's, the simple white dress from the vintage shop soft against her skin, its lace whispering of her mother's roses, her truth. The chateau's grand hall was silent, a reverent hush swallowing the crowd's earlier whispers. Who is she? That dress, their eyes wide, caught in the glow of her presence. Dorian's gaze held hers, his brown eyes raw with love, pride, a flicker of awe at the woman who'd walked through scorn and sabotage to reach him. The officiant waited, his hands poised, but the moment was theirs, the air thick with their bond, unbroken by Vivienne's schemes or Celeste's betrayal. Reed stood to the side, his phone a quiet weapon, the texts, payment wired, no gown, no entry, proof of Vivienne's fall. The mogul herself sat rigid, her silver hair stark, her face pale, her triumph shattered by Brielle's walk-in, a bride no one could deny. The crowd, moguls, tycoons, faces of power, leaned forward, sensing a story bigger than they'd known, their doubt melted into something new. Respect. Brielle's hazel eyes flickered to the roses lining the aisle, her one demand, now a symbol of her fight, sneakers, gates, the socialites' sneer, overcome in this moment. Vivienne's threat, marry a nobody and risk everything, was dust now, her plot exposed, but Brielle felt no need to gloat. She was here, with Dorian, her love of fire no one could dim. His hand squeezed hers, his smile a vow before words, and she knew he saw her, not the gown, not the chateau, but her, the woman he'd chosen in Atlanta's reign. The silence held, a canvas for what came next, and she was ready, her heart steady, her truth clear. Atlanta's fall had turned crisp, October's leaves scattering across Brielle's street, as she and Dorian planned their Napa wedding, every detail a defiance of Vivienne's shadow. They'd sat on her couch, jazz playing low, Reed's notes on the chateau spread out, his voice sharp with loyalty. "She'll try something," he'd said, glancing at Dorian, then Brielle. "But I'm watching." Brielle had nodded, her hand on the ring's chain, her voice fierce. "Let her," she'd said, her hazel eyes bright. "We're not hiding anymore." Dorian had pulled her close, his laugh warm, real. "You're my secret weapon," he'd said, kissing her, and she'd felt it, their love, a force no mogul could break. But Vivienne's silence had been a blade, and Brielle's instincts, honed from years of reading people's masks, had whispered caution. "She'll hit where it hurts," she'd told him, her voice low, certain. "But I'm not breaking." He'd smiled, his eyes steady, trusting. "Neither am I," he'd said, and they'd planned not just a wedding but a life. Her designs, his dreams, a future no one could steal. The chateau had been their choice, a place to claim their love, but Vivienne's reach, Celeste the gown, had almost stolen it, a reminder of her power now crumbling under Brielle's truth. The officiant stepped forward, his voice gentle, breaking the hall's silence. "We gather to join Dorian Sterling and Brielle Monroe," he began, his words simple, clear, landing like stones in still water. The crowd hushed, their earlier murmurs, "Did she get cold feet?" gone, replaced by a quiet awe. Vivienne's hands clenched, her diamonds glinting, but she was powerless now, her plot laid bare by Reed's proof, her smile a memory. Dorian turned to Brielle, his hand lifting hers, his voice low, meant for her but carrying to the room, raw, unshaken. "Brielle," he said, his eyes locked on hers, love afire in their depths. "They didn't think you were enough. Celeste, the guests, even Vivienne. They saw sneakers, a barista, a woman they could push out. But you were always more than enough for me. You're my strength, my truth, the only one who saw me, not my name, not my world. I love you, not for what you bring, but for who you are, fierce, real, mine. I vow to stand with you, to fight for you, to build a life where you never doubt your place." His words hit, not just her, but the crowd, a ripple of gasps. He means it. She's his everything, and Brielle's throat tightened, her eyes burning. Not with tears, but with love, fierce, alive. The white dress felt lighter, her mother's roses in the air, and she squeezed his hand, her voice steady, rising, her own vow a blade through the hall's last doubts. "Dorian," she said, her hazel eyes warm, unyielding, her words clear, deliberate. "You loved me when I had nothing, no money, no name, just a sketchbook and a fight. That's everything to me. You saw me, not a barista, not a nobody, but me, my heart, my fire, my dreams. They tried to keep me out, Vivienne, her bribes, their whispers, but you never wavered. I vow to love you, to challenge you, to build a world where we're enough, always. No gates, no lies, just us." The crowd stilled, their breath held, her words a fire that burned away judgment, scorn, Vivienne's schemes. A woman in sapphire dabbed her eyes, a tycoon nodded, respect clear, and even the socialite from the morning, why do they let staff wander, sat silent, her smirk gone, caught in the truth of their love. Vivienne's face was stone, her hands folded, her power broken, not by anger but by vows no one could deny. Dorian's smile broke, wide, raw, his hand cupping her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. "Always," he whispered, for her alone, and she nodded, her smile matching his, their world small, complete. The officiant spoke, his voice warm, guiding them, rings, promises, a kiss, but the crowd felt it, a shift deeper than ceremony. Reed stood tall, his nod subtle, his phone still ready, but unneeded now, the texts a spark that had lit their truth. The rings slid on, hers the sapphire from that park, his a simple band she'd chosen, no flash, just meaning. And they kissed, soft but fierce, the hall erupting not in whispers but applause, loud, real, a wave of awe. She's the bride, they're real. The words floated, no longer questions but facts. Vivienne rose, her exit swift, silent, her shadow gone, her defeat sealed by vows that shut everyone up. Brielle pulled back, her eyes on Dorian's, her laugh soft, free, the white dress a quiet triumph. "We did it," she said, her voice low, theirs alone, the roses' scent wrapping them. "We did," he said, his arm around her, his voice warm, proud. "You did." The officiant pronounced them, the quartet soared, and they turned, hand in hand, facing the crowd, not as billionaire and barista, but as Dorian and Brielle, equals, unbreakable. The guests rose, clapping, some cheering, their doubt ashes now, and Brielle felt it, her mother's roses, Dorian's love, her own fire, a moment no one could steal, a vow that silenced the world. Brielle and Dorian stood hand in hand at the altar. Their vows. You were always more than enough for me, and you loved me when I had nothing, still ringing in the chateau's grand hall, a fire that had silenced the crowd's doubts and shattered Vivienne's schemes. The applause rolled over them, warm, alive, the guests, moguls, tycoons, faces once skeptical, now on their feet, clapping, some cheering, their whispers of cold feet, and nobody replaced by awe. Brielle's simple white dress, chosen from a vintage shop, glowed soft against her caramel skin, her hazel eyes locked on Dorian's, his smile wide, raw, his black tux sharp, but his touch softer, a vow beyond words. Vivienne's exit, swift and silent, had left a void, her defeat sealed by Reed's proof, texts exposing her bribe to Celeste, her sabotage of the gown, now unneeded as the crowd embraced them, not as billionaire and barista, but as equals, their love undeniable. The officiant's final words, husband and wife, settled like dust after a storm, and they kissed again, slow, deep, the roses' scent wrapping them. Brielle's laugh a quiet triumph as she whispered, "We did it." The reception loomed, a blur of toasts and dances, but Brielle felt only Dorian, his arm around her, his voice warm. You did. Her heart full, the morning's wounds, sneakers, scorn, locked gates, fading under his love. The crowd parted, Lena's grin bright from the side, Reed's nod steady, and they moved forward, not just into the night, but a life they'd fought for. Vivienne's shadow was gone, but Brielle knew their story. Atlanta's reign, a park proposal, a fight against power, wasn't over. Its next chapter waiting beyond the chateau's glow. Atlanta's winter had been their proving ground, December's chill pushing Brielle and Dorian closer, their love a shield against Vivienne's threats. They'd spent nights planning, not just a wedding but a future. Her designs, his dreams, a house where roses grew. One evening, in her apartment, jazz playing low, Dorian had pulled her onto his lap, his hands warm, his voice teasing. "You ready for this?" he'd asked, his eyes bright, meaning more than Napa, more than vows. She'd laughed, her curls loose, her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat. "For you." "Always," she'd said, kissing him, their plans a fire no mogul could dim. But Vivienne's reach, Celeste, the gown, had tested them, and Brielle's walk-in, her simple dress, had been her answer, a truth they'd carry into tonight, their first as husband and wife. The chateau's reception hall sparkled, crystal flutes clinking, laughter rising as guests swirled across the dance floor, the quartet now a jazz band, their notes weaving through the air like a pulse. Brielle and Dorian had danced, her white dress flowing, his hand steady at her waist, their smiles a private world amid the crowd. Lena's toast, to the queen who shut 'em all up, had sparked cheers, Reed's quiet raise of a glass a nod to their fight. The socialite from the morning, her smirk gone, avoided Brielle's gaze, and Celeste was nowhere, her role erased by truth. Vivienne's absence was a victory, her power broken, but Brielle didn't linger on it. Her eyes were on Dorian, his laugh, his touch, the night theirs to claim. As the hour grew late, the crowd thinning, Dorian leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "Ready to slip away?" he asked, his voice low, a spark in his brown eyes, not just love but hunger, a promise of more. She nodded, her smile soft, her heart racing, not from nerves but want. "Lead the way," she said, her voice a tease, her hand slipping into his, the white dress catching the light as they moved through the hall, past roses, past guests, to a private staircase, its curve lit by candles, leading to their suite. The chateau's hum faded, the world narrowing to them, their steps a rhythm, their love a fire ready to burn brighter. The suite was a haven, its windows open to Napa's night, stars sharp above vineyards, a breeze carrying jasmine. The bed, draped in white, stood waiting, but Dorian didn't rush, his hands slow, deliberate, as he closed the door, the lock clicking soft. Brielle turned, her dress glowing in the candlelight, her curls free, her hazel eyes meeting his, warm, open, but holding a flicker of something new. Vulnerability, not doubt, but a quiet awe at what they'd become. He stepped to her, his tux jacket shed, his shirt crisp but unbuttoned at the collar, his hands finding hers, lifting them to his lips, kissing her knuckles, slow, reverent. "Brielle," he said, his voice low, rough with emotion. "You're my wife." The word landed heavy, beautiful, a truth they'd fought for, and her breath caught, her smile trembling, not with tears but joy. "And you're my husband," she said, her voice soft, fierce, stepping closer, her hands sliding to his chest, feeling his warmth, his pulse. "After everything, Gates, lies, her, they didn't stop us." He shook his head, his hands moving to her waist, pulling her gently, their bodies close, the dress a whisper between them. "Nothing could," he said, his eyes locked on hers, love afire, but deeper now, a worship that saw every scar, every fight. "You're more than I dreamed, Brielle. Let me show you." She nodded, her throat tight, her hands rising to his face, tracing his jaw, his lips. Her touch a question answered by his. He kissed her, slow, deep, not a claim but a gift, his hands moving to the dress's straps, slipping them down, the cotton and lace falling soft, pooling at her feet. She stood bare, not shy but alive, her caramel skin glowing, her eyes steady, trusting, wanting. He stepped back just a moment, his gaze sweeping her, not lust, but reverence. Every curve a story, Atlanta's reign, her sketches, their vows. "Dorian," she said, her voice a whisper, stepping to him, her hands unbuttoning his shirt, slow, deliberate, her fingers brushing his skin, warm, real. "I'm not used to this." The words slipped out, raw, honest, not fear, but truth. His love, this worship, was vast, new, a depth she was learning to hold. He smiled, his hands framing her face, his voice low, certain. "You will be," he said, kissing her again, guiding her to the bed, the sheets cool against her back, his body warm above. He moved slow, lips tracing her neck, her collarbone, her pulse, each kiss a vow. "You're enough. You're mine. You're everything." Her hands gripped his shoulders, her breath quickening. Not just desire, but connection, a merging of souls who'd fought the world to be here. He worshipped her, not just loving, but honoring. Her arms, scarred from childhood falls, her hips, her thighs, every inch a map of her strength. She arched, her gasps soft, her eyes locked on his, seeing him. Dorian, not the billionaire, but the man who'd knelt in a park, who'd chosen her against power. "I love you," she whispered, her voice breaking, her hands pulling him closer, needing him, all of him. "I love you," he said, his voice rough, raw, his hands steady, guiding, their rhythm building, not rushed but inevitable, a tide pulling them under. The night stretched, Napa's stars their only witness, jasmine on the breeze, their bodies a language, slow, fierce, tender, speaking what vows couldn't hold. She wasn't used to this, but she learned, her heart opening, her trust complete, his promise. "You will be," a truth unfolding with every touch. They stilled, breathless, tangled, her head on his chest, his heartbeat her anchor, the candles low, the sweet quiet. "We're here," she said, her voice soft, a smile in it, her fingers tracing his arm, the night theirs, no gates, no lies. "We're home," he said, kissing her forehead, his arm tightening, their love a fire no one could dim. The chateau slept, the roses outside blooming. And Brielle felt it, Her mother's memory, their fight, this moment, a passion deeper than flesh, a vow sealed in starlight, theirs forever. Brielle lay against Dorian in the chateau suite, their bodies warm, tangled in the white sheets, the candles burned low, casting soft shadows across her caramel skin. His heartbeat steadied her, a rhythm beneath her cheek, his arm a quiet anchor as Nappa's night breathed jasmine through the open windows. Their wedding night had been more than passion, his slow worship, her whispered, "I'm not used to this," his certain, "You will be." It was a sealing of their fight, their love, a truth forged through Atlanta's reign, Vivienne's schemes, and the chateau's gates. The crowd's applause, Reed's proof, Vivienne's pale defeat. They faded here, in this haven, where her simple white dress lay folded, her hazel eyes soft but alive, her smile a private victory. "We're home," Dorian had said, and she felt it, not just in him but in herself, a woman no one could erase. The stars gleamed beyond, the chateau sleeping, but Brielle's mind stirred, not with doubt but with something new. Possibility, a future they'd shape together. Vivienne was gone, her shadow broken, but the world waited, and Brielle wasn't done fighting, not for love, but for her dreams, her name, her place. She kissed Dorian's chest, her lips light, and he murmured, half asleep, pulling her closer, their night a promise carrying them forward. Atlanta's spring had been their crucible, March's warmth a backdrop to their plans, a wedding, a life, a defiance of Vivienne's threat. Marry a nobody and risk everything. They'd sat in Brielle's apartment, sketches scattered, jazz low, Dorian's hand on hers as they dreamed beyond Nappa. "You'll make dresses," he'd said, his voice sure, tracing her designs, roses blooming in ink. "Not just one, hundreds yours." She'd laughed, her curls loose, her eyes bright. "Big talk, Sterling," she'd teased, but his faith had lit something, a spark she'd carried through the chateau's chaos, Celeste's sneer, the lost gown, Vivienne's bribe. Her walk-in, that simple white dress, had been her answer, not just to them but to herself, a vow to build something real, something hers. Morning broke over Nappa, sunlight spilling through the suite's windows, warming the bed where Brielle and Dorian lay, still tangled, her white dress a soft heap on a chair, its lace catching the light like a memory. They rose slow, coffee steaming, laughter light as they dressed, him in linen, her in a sundress, no trace of the chateau's weight. The reception's echoes, Lena's toast, the crowd's cheers, faded, but Reed's proof, those texts, payment wired. No gown, no entry, loomed, a blade they'd wield today. Breakfast waited downstairs, guests lingering, but the real work was elsewhere, a reckoning Vivienne couldn't dodge. They joined Reed in a quiet lounge, his lean frame tense, his eyes sharp, a laptop open. "It's done," he said, sliding it to Dorian, his voice low, steady. Boards convened. Vivienne's out. The screen showed emails, votes, a swift coup. Sterling Global's directors, alerted by Reed's evidence, had acted fast. Vivienne's shares no match for her betrayal. Her role as chair, her influence, stripped overnight, her threats. "Do you want to be disinherited?" Empty now, her empire cracked. Dorian's jaw tightened, not with triumph but resolve, his hand finding Brielle's under the table, warm, grounding. "She's gone," he said, his voice quiet, final, his eyes on Brielle, not the screen. "For good." Brielle nodded, her smile small, fierce, no gloating, just relief. "She thought she could break us," she said, her voice steady, her hazel eyes bright. "She broke herself." Reed leaned back, his nod subtle, loyal. "Press is sniffing," he said, glancing at Dorian. "They'll want her story." His eyes flicked to Brielle. A question. "You ready?" "Let them come," she said, her voice calm, a spark in her tone. Not for fame, but for truth. I've got something to say. The chateau's glow dimmed as they left Napa, returning to New York, not to Dorian's penthouse, but a brownstone they'd chosen. Warm, theirs, roses climbing the gate. Brielle didn't rest, didn't bask. She worked, her sketches from Atlanta's nights now a plan, a fire she'd stoked through every fight. Monroe Maid was born in a Brooklyn studio, small but hers, dresses not for moguls but for women like her. Real, fierce, dreaming. She hired Lena, her needle sharp, her laugh a spark, and they built, cotton, lace, designs that felt like home, not gloss. Brielle poured herself in, not just art, but purpose, every stitch a defiance of nobody, every sale a step from the chateau's gates. Months flew, Monroe Maid catching eyes, not with flash but truth. Blogs raved, shops called, women wore her dresses, not for status but strength. A year from Napa, Forbes called, their email simple, under 30, we want you. Brielle sat in her studio, fabric strewn, Lena grinning across the room, and laughed, not loud but deep, her hazel eyes warm, no surprise, just pride. The feature ran, Brielle Monroe, from barista to global sensation, redefining fashion, her face on the cover, not in silk but denim, her smile sharp, her story hers. Monroe Maid soared, orders flooding, her name no longer whispered but known, a brand built on love, grit, her mother's roses in every line. Dorian watched, not from above but beside, his empire steady but smaller, his focus hers, their brownstone, their nights, her dreams. He'd frame her sketches, hang them beside her Forbes cover, his voice teasing. Told you, unstoppable, but his eyes proud, her equal, not her savior. Reed stayed close, their friend now, his loyalty a thread through their life, his laugh at dinners a reminder of Napa's fight. One evening in their garden, roses blooming wild, Brielle stood with Dorian, her sundress loose, her curls free, a glass of wine in hand. The city hummed beyond, but here it was them. Her startup global, his board clean, their love a truth no one could touch. They didn't see me coming, she said, her voice soft, her eyes on the roses, Vivian's shadow a faint memory, Celeste's sneer dust. He pulled her close, his lips brushing her temple, his voice warm, low. I did, he said, his hand on hers, the sapphire ring, now worn open, no chain, catching the dusk. Always. She laughed, leaning into him, her heart full, not just of him but herself. Brielle Monroe, not nobody, not bride but maker, dreamer, hers. Monroe Maid was her vow, not to the world but to her mother, to Atlanta's nights, to the gates she'd walked through. Forbes was a nod, not the goal. Her goal was here, in roses, in love, in a life she'd built, stitch by stitch. No one's but hers. What would you do if the same people who looked down on you suddenly wanted to invest in your success? Brielle leaned into Dorian in their brownstone's garden, the roses blooming wild under the dusk, her sundress catching the breeze, her hazel eyes warm with a quiet pride. His arm around her, the sapphire ring glinting on her finger, no longer hidden, no chain, sealed a life they'd fought for from Atlanta's rain to Napa's gates. Monroe Maid was soaring, her dresses worn worldwide, her Forbes cover, Brielle Monroe, from barista to global sensation, framed inside not as a trophy, but a nod to her fire. Vivian's ousting, Celeste's fade, the chateau's applause. They were chapters closed, her startup a new book, every stitch a defiance of nobody. Dorian's words, I did, always lingered, his love her anchor, not her maker, their brownstone a home where roses grew, where dreams breathed. Lena's laugh echoed from a call earlier, Reed's dinner plans set, their circle tight, their world real. The city hummed beyond, but here it was theirs. Her designs global, his empire reshaped, their love a truth no mogul could break. Brielle sipped her wine, her smile soft, her heart full. Not of triumph, but of peace, a future unfolding stitch by stitch. Vivienne's shadow was gone, but Brielle's spark burned brighter, a woman who'd walked through gates, not for glory, but for herself, for him, for what they'd built. New York's winter had been their haven, January's snow dusting their brownstone as Brielle and Dorian settled into marriage. Monroe made a hum of orders, her studio alive. They'd sat by the fire, her sketches scattered, his hand tracing her designs, his voice low. "You're changing things," he'd said, his eyes proud, not just of her but them, not just dresses, people. She'd smiled, her curls loose, her hand on his. "We're changing things," she'd said, kissing him, their love a spark that lit her work, their home, their plans. Vivienne's fall had freed them, but Brielle's rise, her startup, her voice, was hers, a truth she'd carry into every tomorrow, roses blooming in her mind, her mother's memory in every line. 2 years from Napa, spring bloomed soft, the brownstone's windows opened to April's breeze, roses climbing the garden gate. Brielle stood in a new room, painted soft green, 2 cribs side by side, their newborn twins, Amara and Elias, sleeping, their breaths small, steady, a miracle she still caught her breath over. Her sundress, loose from motherhood, swayed as she leaned against Dorian, his arm around her, his black shirt open at the collar, his brown eyes soft, tracing the cribs. Then her face, love a quiet fire. The nursery was theirs, built with care, her sketches on the walls, roses in watercolor, his books stacked for bedtime, a mix of Atlanta's grit and Napa's triumph. Monroe made hummed beyond, a global name now, her studio a hub of women like her, dreamers, fighters, stitching futures. Forbes had called again, 30 over 30, but Brielle had laughed, her focus here on Amara's tiny hand, Elias's soft sigh, Dorian's warmth beside her. Vivienne was a memory, her name faded, her boardroom gone, while Brielle's world grew, dresses, family, love. Dorian turned, his hand lifting her chin, his voice low, raw, meant for her alone. "You turned my world into something real," he said, his eyes locked on hers, seeing not just the mother, the designer, but the woman from Atlanta, her sneakers, her fire. "I'll never forget that girl who walked into my heart." Her throat tightened, her smile trembling, not with tears but joy, her hazel eyes warm, fierce. "You saw her," she said, her voice soft, steady, her hand on his chest, feeling his pulse. "Not the coffee, not the sketchbook, just her. That's why we're here, Dorian. You and me, them." She nodded to the cribs, Amara stirring, Elias calm, their twins a vow beyond Napa's altar. He kissed her, slow, deep, not passion alone, but gratitude, a sealing of their story. Rain, gates, roses, twins. "We're more than I dreamed," he said, pulling back, his hand brushing her curls, her ring catching the light. No chain, no secrets now. She laughed, light, free, leaning into him, her eyes on the cribs. The roses outside blooming, her mother's memory alive in this room. "More than enough," she said, her voice a whisper, her heart full, not of headlines but truth. Amara's breath, Elias's warmth, Dorian's love, her designs a hum beyond. Monroe made was her mark, but this, twins, home, him, was her life, a satisfying ending no one could steal. Lena's voice called from downstairs, dinner ready, Reed's laugh joining, their circle tight, their table full. Brielle and Dorian lingered, hands linked, watching their twins, the nursery a haven, New York's spring a promise. She'd walked through gates, worn sneakers, built a name, but here, with him, with them, she was Brielle, not nobody, not bride, but whole, her love, her fight, her roses, a story complete yet endless, blooming where no shadow could reach. Did this story touch your heart? If yes, I invite you to like, share, and subscribe. Tell us in the comments what part made you smile and what lesson you're taking away today. Thank you for watching and see you in the next one.